Please welcome Molly Fletcher.
Thanks, Brody. You are awesome, and I signed the petition.
Thank you, Molly.
I was excited to sign it, actually. I was honored to sign it. It is so fun to be with all of you. Thank you for grinding it through the snow and getting here. It is terrific to be with you. So as Brody said, I was a sports agent for almost 20 years, and I represented professional athletes, coaches, broadcasters, guys and gals who woke up every day and were pretty good at what they did. In a business where relationships are incredibly important to our ability to win, to our ability to be successful. So, in fact, this is an interesting nugget for you. There are more agents than athletes to represent. So a little bit of a jacked up business model, right? So in a business, too, where I had a chance, as much as I was negotiating their contracts and representing them and helping them navigate their careers, I was also a little bit of a sponge. I had a chance to watch the way they behaved, the way they prepared, the way they recovered from adversity, the way they dealt with change and challenges, the way they dealt with opportunities. So I was a little bit of a sponge as much as I was navigating their lives and their careers. So I could see firsthand the difference, right, between a D3 basketball coach who's good at what they do, right? Who's special at what they do. The ones like that go to the next level, the Kentuckys and the University of North Carolina, those kind of guys and gals, and the ones that don't. I would study in a way the difference between the guy and the gal out on the PGA or LPGA tour that's 150 on the money list, the difference between them and the ones that are top 10 on the money list, that are making cuts week after week, that are holding trophies over their heads. So for years, it was a chance to study them, and I want to walk you through kind of what I saw work, some of the mistakes that I made along the way, in hopes that most importantly you can lay that over top of the lives and the people that you serve so that you can do it maybe just a little bit better. So it was a business where relationships and performance were integral, and so I'll share some of those stories. So do you remember a guy by the name of John Smoltz? So Smoltz was a right-handed pitcher, right, for the Atlanta Braves. And so when we talk about leaving here maybe a little better version of who walked in, I think it starts with our belief in our ability to continue to evolve. And so Smoltz was a guy that he was a right-handed pitcher, so that meant that every 4 or 5 days he'd step out on the mound and he would throw 80 or 90 pitches and then he'd sit down. And 4 or 5 days later, he'd do it again. And 4 or 5 days later, he'd do it again. That was John's rhythm and his routine, and he was really comfortable with it. He was very rhythmic and systematic about the way he prepared as a starter. In fact, you'll find this interesting. John used to sleep in a hyperbaric chamber in between his starts so that he could maximize the oxygen flow to his body so that physically he could recover more quickly for his next start. So he was so pumped. One day he comes up to the office, he's like, "Mom, you're not gonna believe this." He goes, "I got this hyperbaric chamber." He said, "It's sweet." He said, "I get in it after I pitch, I zip it up, I go to sleep, I wake up." He goes, "I feel amazing." And I'm like, "Dude, that's awesome." I said, "But you're married." So I'm like, "John, make sure you come out of that hyperbaric chamber once in a while," you know what I mean? So one day he comes up to the office, he goes, "Mom, you're not gonna believe this." I said, "Yeah, what's up?" He goes, "You know, Diane," he goes, "we've been having some trouble." His wife. I said, "Yeah." He goes, "We're getting a divorce." I'm like, "Dude, right? You've been living in that chamber, right?" So Smoltz was intentional about the way he behaved and the way he prepared. And so I'm sitting in my office one day and the phone rings, and it's the general manager of the Atlanta Braves. And he calls me up and he says, "Molly, we kind of have an interesting situation next season." He said, "We don't have anybody that we think can close for us." I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "There's nobody in the minor league system that we believe you can put out on the mound at 18 years old and throw hard and close out and finish games." He said, "There's nobody on the free agent market that we can go pay, and there's nobody we want to trade for." He said, "I need you to do me a favor. I need you to talk to John about stepping into the closer role next season." Now, this is a big change for a guy that all his career he's been a starter. For over a decade, that's all he's done. Every 4 or 5 days, he gets up and pitches and plays golf every day in between. Here's a shift. So I said, well, gosh, and as I'm having this conversation with John Shearholtz, the general manager, I am looking at bone spurs that had come out of one of John's many elbow surgeries. So John comes out of surgery, and he's sort of waking up, and I'm standing there next to the doctor, and John kind of starts to wake up and he looks up at me and then he looks up at the doc and he's sort of waking up and the doc looks at him and he goes, hey man, just so you know, this is what we took out of your elbow. And he rolls out his hand and shows John the bone spurs. And John looks at him and goes, wow, and he looks up at me and then he looks back down at the bone spurs and then he looks back up at me and he goes, hey Molly, he said, do you want them? I mean, literally, like they're diamond earrings, ladies, you know what I mean? So of course I said, yeah, man, that'd be great. So my team made him into a paperweight. So there they are as a paperweight on my desk. So I'm having this conversation, and in that moment, I am instantly reminded of what an absolute wreck this guy's arm is. So I said, well, God, let me talk to him and see if he'd be willing to make this shift. So I called Bobby Cox, who was a client and the manager of the team, and I said, Bobby, look, man, I just got a call, and I walk him through, and he goes, yeah, no, Molly, I know. He said, we need him to step into this closer role. I called John up and I walk him through the scenario, and I did a lot of research before I did, and I walked John through it, and I said, look, man, they don't have anybody on the free agent market that they want to pay. There's nobody they want to trade for, and there's nobody in the minor leagues you can put in that role as a rookie. He goes, okay. He goes, let me think about it. He takes like 3 days. He sort of processes it. He comes up to the office 3 days later on his way to the field, and he said, look, this closer thing, Molly, he said, I want to do it. He said, I want to do it. He said, I want to step into that role. They need me in that role. The following season, John stepped into the role of closer and led the National League in saves with 55 saves. John stepped into that role as uncomfortable as it was for him. One of the things I saw with great athletes and coaches consistently was they truly leaned into change. They believed that on the other side of that pit that we all get in our stomachs during challenging times, during change, that the other side of that usually is an opportunity for growth. I saw so many guys believe that leaning into those moments created opportunities. And so I share that because I think when we think about getting better, it starts with believing, really believing in our ability to evolve. I think we've also got to discover the gaps inside of the lives of the people that we serve, both on our farms and in our worlds and with the people that we serve as our end users, but also inside of ourselves. So I'll tell you a fun personal story. I graduated from Michigan State, which I won't talk about a lot here because I'm sure there's a bunch of Wisconsin fans, so I'll behave. But I played, yeah, there we go, good. We got one good man out there, nice. So I graduated from Michigan State where I played tennis. And I wanted to stay in the business of sports, but I was 21 when I graduated, right? And I didn't know what that really meant. But I grew up in East Lansing, Michigan, and I'm just such a big girl, right? I went 2 miles away to college. So I graduate, and I look at my mom and dad, and I said, look, I think I want to move to Atlanta. I want to try to get into the sports space. And I said, you know, there's the Super Bowl's coming, the Olympics is coming, there's a ton of pro teams, college teams. I said, I think I want to try to move down there and see if I can find a job in sports. So my parents think, well, this ought to be kind of interesting, honey. They said, how are you going to fund this little excursion to Atlanta to find your dream job? And I said, look, I'm going to teach tennis all summer and try to save as much money as I can and take all that down to Atlanta to try to find a job. So I teach tennis all summer. By the end of the summer, I have $2,000. So I grab my literally $2,100 bills. $2,100 bills. I put them in my back pocket. And I get into my mom and dad's house and I borrow this just blue polyester suit. I hope no one's wearing one, actually. Awful suit. And I pack it in my car just in case I get a meeting, I have to act like a grown-up. So I've got my suit, I've got a little bit, I got my $2,100 bills, I'm backing out of the driveway of the house I grew up, and I look up at the top of the driveway and my mom and dad, who I'm very close to, are standing there. And I see my mom almost kind of get choked up. She's kind of crying a little bit, and she's sort of choked up, and I look at my dad, and he kind of nudges her, and I can read his lips. He looks at her, and he goes, really? He said, she is going to be back in 2 weeks. Get over it, right? So I back out of the driveway, I get down to Atlanta. One of my good friends from college was living in a little one-bedroom apartment in Atlanta. And she said, look, Molly, you can live with me for a little bit, but it's 600 square feet and it's gonna get tight fast. But you can live with me for a little bit and kind of until you sort of figure this out. So I get down to Atlanta, and when I got there, my college coach from Michigan State gave me the names of 3 people in Atlanta that taught tennis for a living. And she said, look, Molly, I know you don't want to necessarily be a tennis pro forever, but you know, these people are in Atlanta, right? I mean, they've got a heartbeat, call them up. Maybe they'll help you. And I had this philosophy when I was young, and I think it's still true a little bit, but when we ask for advice, we get a job, and when we ask for a job, we end up with advice. I think it's true in business, by the way, right? So sometimes in business, when we ask for the business, we get advice. Sometimes when we ask for advice, we actually just get the business. So I wake up that first morning, I've got these 3 names of these 3 tennis pros. So I pick up the phone and I call this first guy on my list. And we're sort of talking, and I'm kind of asking him for advice on people he might know in the sports space in Atlanta. And as we're talking, he said, you know, Molly, you play tennis, you taught? I said, yeah. He goes, you know, a really good buddy of mine, he teaches tennis at an apartment complex down the street from where you are. He said, but he's getting married, and he's moving out of his apartment complex where he teaches tennis. And he said, you know, people in Atlanta teach tennis at their apartment complexes for a reduced rate on the rent. I said, what do you mean? He goes, like my buddy, this guy, like he teaches every Tuesday night for an hour and a half, and in exchange for that, the property gives him a little bit off their rent every month. And I was like, dude, I gotta find a deal like that, right? I'm down here with $2,000, I ate grapes at the grocery store all the way to Atlanta, right? I need one of these deals. He said, you know what, actually my buddy, he just got engaged. He said in a minute, he's gonna be moving out of that property, but he hasn't told the manager that he's moving out yet. He said, you wanna go over there and introduce yourself to the manager. So I drive over to the property, and I walked in, and the manager was there, and she was very nice. And I said, hey, I'm Molly, I played tennis, I've taught a little bit. I said, you have a court here? And she said, yeah, we have a court. And I said, do you use it to teach to the residents here that live here? And she said, oh, yeah. She said, we have a tennis pro. She said, he's awesome. He's been here for 6 years. He teaches every Tuesday night to anybody that lives here that wants to come. And I said, oh, okay, cool. She said, are you thinking about moving in, right? And I'm like, no, ma'am. I said, but gosh, you know, if anything was to change, you know, with that pro, I said, man, I'd love to talk to you about teaching here. And she said, oh, yeah, no, totally appreciate you coming by, but like I said, he's been here forever, and everybody loves him, and we're totally good. So I give her my just homemade, bootleg, super unprofessional, I don't know if you did this, business card, right? But man, was I pumped, because I was a grown-up. So I hand her my card, and I said, well, let's stay connected, you know, if anything changes. She goes, oh, yeah, for sure, no problem, but, you know, like I said, I think we're good. So I get back in my car, and I'm driving back to my friend's apartment. And as I'm driving, I see kind of right across the street, literally, it's probably like my 9-iron, man, you're like, I don't know, 6-iron away. You know what I'm saying? You know? So I see this little place, and I think, Cal, you know, I wonder if that place sells a lot of pizza, that apartment complex, because it's really close, and it's right there, and there's 1,100 units in this little apartment complex, so you would think probably they do. So I pull up my car, and this place is called Pero's Pizza. So I pull up my car, and I walked in, and I said, hey, is Mr. or Mrs. Pero here? Kind of a safe bet, right? So out comes Mr. Pero. I said, Mr. Pero, he said, yeah. I said, hey, man, listen, you know that apartment complex right over there? He goes, yeah. I said, you know, they have like 1,100 units over there, a ton of young people. I said, do you sell a lot of pizza over there? And he said, gosh, I mean, I guess a little bit, but I don't know, not a ton. And I said, man, I mean, it's right there. You know, it just kind of, and his wife walks out, and she's standing there, and I said, it kind of feels like you guys should just be driving back and forth, you know, all day, just crushing it. And they said, yeah, that's interesting. And I said, what if we did something where, let's say once a month you give me like 15 or 20 pizzas for free. In exchange for that, I'll take a coupon from Pero's, I'll stuff it in the newsletter that they give to every resident that lives there at the beginning of the month. I'd seen this little newsletter when I was in there. He said, what do you mean? And I said, so you give me 15, 20 free pizzas once a month, I'll take a coupon from Pero's, stuff it in the newsletter, we can drive traffic back to Pero's. He goes, I love it. I said, awesome. I said, the thing is, Mr. Pero, I don't have a deal over there yet. I said, but I'm really close, okay? So when I get it, I'll be back here and we can lock this thing up. And he goes, well, I really like it. I said, no, I got you. I'll be right back. I get in my car, I drive back to my friend's apartment. I get back there and I call my buddy at Wilson Sporting Goods who gave me tennis rackets when I played in college. So I called my friend Rick and I said, hey Rick, man, I'm down in Atlanta trying to get a job in sports. I said, listen, I'm just curious. I said, you know, do you have like a closet down the hall at your office with a bunch of, you know, water bottles, keychains, t-shirts, a bunch of stuff? He goes, yeah. I said, could you do me a huge favor, put a box of all that together for me, send it down to me in Atlanta. I can give it away to the people that come to the tennis clinics, get them excited about Wilson stuff, drive traffic to the local retailers. He goes, wow. He said, yeah, I'd be happy to do that, Molly, no problem. He said, it was fun in college with you, et cetera. I'd be happy to. Awesome. Next morning, I wake back up. I go, this is 93, right? So I go back to Kinko's, which is my favorite place in the world. I go back to Kinko's and I print these tennis tips that I'd written for a little kind of, you know what, the little pizza restaurants in local, they sort of have these little free magazines. So I'd written these tennis tips in this newsletter in Lansing. I print all these tips, there's like 50 of them, and I think, you know, we could take all these tennis tips, put them in the newsletter to get people excited about coming to the tennis clinic. And maybe if she's got people that are thinking about moving in but haven't pulled the trigger, she could give them the newsletter, get them excited about the program. And so I print all these little tennis tips. 1:15, my box comes in from my buddy Rick at Wilson to my friend's apartment. So I grab my box of stuff, I get my tennis tips, I drive back over to the apartment complex. I walk in and the manager was there, and I walked in with my box of stuff, my tennis tips, and I said, hey, how are you? I'm Molly. I came by the other day. You know, I just wanted to swing in. And she goes, oh my gosh. She said, you are not going to believe this. And I'm like, what? She said, the tennis pro came in this morning. He's getting married and moving out. She goes, we need a tennis pro. And I was like, no. I mean, this is amazing timing, right? Like, this is incredible. And she goes, yeah, this kind of is. This is amazing. And I said, well, gal, I was just coming by to drop off this box of stuff from Wilson. These guys are super cool. They'll hook us up once in a while. We can give this to people that come to the clinics. She said, wow, this is great. And I said, these are some tennis tips. I wrote these, but I thought we could use them again here in the newsletter to get people excited about the program. And she goes, wow, this is really cool. Like, this guy we had was awesome. Like I said, he's been here forever. And she said, but like, he didn't do all this stuff. And I said, yeah, no, this is great. So how did it work? Like, what was the deal? And she said, well, like I told you, every Tuesday night for an hour and a half, he would teach to anybody that wanted to come to the clinics that lives here. And I said, cool, how did it work financially? And she said, well, we gave him $500 off the rent every month. Cool, how much is the rent? $850. She said, so what he would do is on the first of the month, he'd just write us a check for the difference of $350. And I said, okay, cool. I said, listen, you're not gonna believe this. I said, there's this restaurant right across the street. I said, these guys are amazing. They'll hook us up with like 15, 20 free pizzas once a month. I said, they'll deliver them. I said, in exchange for that, if you'd let me, I'd take a coupon from there, put it in the newsletter, drive traffic back to the pizza place. And she goes, wow, this is cool. Like I said, this guy was great, but like, man, eating a pizza and this Wilson stuff and these tennis tips. And I said, yeah. I said, you know, this whole like $850, $500, $350 thing, why don't we just waive it, you know? I mean, it'd be cleaner, don't you think? You know what I mean? Like, it'd be easier. She's like, what? I said, yeah, let's just waive it. I'll move in. We can keep the momentum going, you know, from the program. She goes, well, gosh, I mean, I got to go back and call my boss, you know, and see if we can do that. And I said, yeah, no, that's totally cool. I'm good. I have no job. You know what I mean? I'll wait. So I stand there. She goes back. She comes out like 5 minutes later. She said, you're not going to believe this. She said, I told him about this Wilson stuff and this pizza thing and these tennis tips. She said, you're good to go. She said, in fact, we'd love you to move in as soon as possible. I lived in this little one-bedroom apartment complex for free for 9 years, right? It was sick. It was one of my favorite deals. My athletes used to say, like, my deal's your favorite deal. I'm like, no, man, that was my favorite deal ever, right? But I tell that story because to me in life, when we think about what we all wake up and do, how can we ensure that we stay creative in the work that we do? How can we sometimes maybe act like we have the business before we have the business? How can we behave in a way that sometimes sends a message to the people that we work with and that we want to work with that you really matter to me? At the end of the day, we were able to drive and take the occupancy of the property from 87 to about an average of about 94% over that 9-year window. And the good news is now my family and I go back to Perro's and we pay for our dinners, right? But I would encourage you to pull back and say, how can I discover the gaps inside of the world that I live in? How can I discover the gaps inside of the lives of the people that I serve and I lead? And how can I potentially behave in a way that sends them a powerful message? When we think about discovery too, I think it's about having the courage to discover our own gaps. So you guys have heard of Kevin Durant? Kevin Durant's a pretty special player in the NBA. Well, I had a chance to do some marketing deals with Kevin, and he told me kind of a cool story. And here's a guy that, as you can imagine, everybody around Kevin Durant tells Kevin Durant that he's the man, right? I mean, everybody's filling him up with how great he is. But Kevin's a guy that always knows that he can get a little bit better, that there's always a little bit more. So Kevin went out and hired this analytics kid on his own, independent from the team and the teams that he's played for. He hired this young kid named Justin. Really smart, young analytics kid, and he said, look, Justin, here's the deal. This is what the team thinks are my gaps, but I think there's more. I think there's other areas that the team doesn't even see that I know that I can get better at. So what I want you to do, Justin, I want you to come to every single practice I have, and I want you to grab data for me around these 7 or 8 metrics that Kevin felt he could improve on. He said, I want you to grab data for me, and after every practice, man, I want to sit down with you and go through that and look at it and understand it, both the numbers and the film. And then after games, Justin, he said, I want to do the same thing. After every game, I want to sit down and go through this data, go through the film with you, and get really clear on these gaps. He said, and then after, what I want to do is roll that all up, of course, and apply it to my next practice or my next game. So here is a guy who the world is telling him he's there, right? He's made plenty of money, has a good brand and reputation, but he wasn't afraid to dig in and discover more gaps inside of himself. So after literally the championship series a couple years ago, Durant is in his hotel room after game 1 till 2 in the morning with Justin going through the stats, going through the data, digging in so that he can pivot and get a little bit better for the next game. After game 3, same thing. One thing I can promise you, NBA guys, they're not usually in their hotel room after games with analytics kids. Just saying, right? So discovering the gaps inside of ourselves and certainly inside of the lives and the people that we serve is so key. The other thing I think I'll tell you about a mistake that I made is getting clear on the kinds of relationships that we're building in the work that we do. And also getting clear on who gets our energy and who doesn't. You guys grind it, right? You get after it, and I know there's some challenging times right now. So I'll tell you a personal story about a mistake that I made that was expensive and embarrassing, and I learned a lot from it, and I love to share it from here in hopes that it helps you. So Billy Donovan's the head coach of the University of Florida when he signs with us, with our agency. Billy Donovan now is in the NBA. Donovan is a pretty good college basketball coach at the time. Donovan signs with my agency because he says, look, I know you guys, we had a lot of NBA coaches. He said, I want to go to the NBA. Lots of college coaches want to go to what they deem to be the next level, the NBA. So he said, I want to go to the NBA, I want to coach 80 games, right, and just get out of this college recruiting rat race. We said, well, good, Billy. I said, well, Billy, you're a heck of a basketball coach at the college level. He'd won 2 national championships at Florida at the time. So I said, so Billy, like, we need to be pretty careful about what job you go get at the NBA level. And he, of course, agreed. I said, we need to take our time with this. And he said, no question. So about 6 months go by after we sign him, and we get word that the Orlando Magic job is going to open up. So here's the Magic. Billy's in Gainesville at Florida. This is Orlando. Like, this feels kind of from a personal perspective like it could be a pretty awesome fit. He has 4 children and his wife, Christy. So I hear that this job is going to open up. So I called Billy and I said, look, Billy, I think this job at the Magic's going to open up in a minute. I said, is that a job that you'd be interested in? And Billy goes, wow. He said, absolutely. He said, I know, I'm really familiar with the roster, the players, the general manager. He said, yes, that's interesting. I said, cool. Well, we got to wait till they actually fire their coach before I can call the team. But when they do, we can. 2 days later, they fire their coach. Now the job's open and it's public. So I call Billy and his wife, Christy, and they say, go for it. I said, great. So I have to call the athletic director at Florida to get the clearance. I do. I call the Magic and I said, look, we got a guy that's really interested in this job. And they said, cool, who is it? And I said, Billy Donovan. They said, look, this is the deal. He's the #1 guy on our list. That level of transparency in sports is very unique. We said, great. So literally, for 4 or 5 days, I'm just going back and forth with the team and Billy on the contract terms, right? On the base salary, the bonuses. We load this thing up. Cars, flights for his wife. I mean, we stack this contract with lots of great stuff. Schools for the kids, private jet flights for Christy till they move. I mean, this thing is packed. Billy loves it. Christy's happy, his wife. Cool. So it's a $27.5 million contract. So now the Magic want to announce their new coach. Billy flies from Gainesville with his wife, Christy, to go do a press conference at the Magic's arena. I fly from Atlanta, land in Orlando. We get in a car, we drive over to the Magic's arena. Billy sits in a boardroom and signs 6 original agreements, right? Executes 6 original contracts. And as I'm standing in this boardroom, I can still see it. On the other side of the table of the boardroom table is a basketball court. And down below is the practice court with all the media there to announce the new coach. So it's the local guys to ESPN, they're all there. I looked at Billy, I go, dude, you're gonna be here a while, right? This place is packed. So Billy goes down, he sits in the front of the room and does just a terrific job. Super comfortable, answers everybody's questions, very prepared, nails it. We get back into the car, I fly back to Atlanta, meet up with a couple of my agents, we go to a great restaurant, Billy flies back to Gainesville. It was actually on a Friday night. So we go to this awesome restaurant and I'm sort of sitting there and Billy, we have a great bottle of wine, right? What the heck? We just made our client really happy. Celebrate. You're going to be doing a little of that tonight, I heard, right? So halfway through the bottle of wine, Billy calls. He said, look, Molly, he said, I want to bring one of my assistant coaches from Florida with me. So would you go ahead and call him? He doesn't have an agent. Call the team and sort of start that deal, which is very common. We love referrals. So I said, great. So literally call the coach, call the team, and kind of lay that foundation that Billy wants to bring him with him. So we ordered another bottle of wine, right? What the heck, The next morning at 7:30 in the morning, I'm cooking breakfast for our daughters, and the phone rings, 7:30 in the morning, Saturday morning. Billy calls, he says, hey, listen, Molly, this whole Magic's job thing. He said, I don't want that job. He said, never mind. I know this is a lot. He said, but what I need you to do is I need you to call the Magic, tell them it's not them, it's me. I just want to stay at Florida. So I just need him to rip up those 6 contracts. Poof, right? Like make it go away. Like I didn't just do that. I said, Billy, we just announced this to the world. I said, really? Are you sure? Because, man, if we walk away from this, it could be a while before you go get another NBA job. And Billy goes, I know. I said, well, can we maybe jump on the phone with Christy and talk through it and just make sure you're clear? I want to do what you want to do, and I want to honor that, but I also think we want to make sure you're really clear. So I hang up the phone, and I'm standing in my kitchen, and I am an awful cook, and I'm standing over this horrible breakfast I'm attempting to make for my daughters, and I'm thinking, what happened? What happened, and what did I do wrong, and how did we get here? This guy wanted to go to the NBA, we do a great contract, et cetera, and what I realized was throughout that 4 or 5 day period when I was going back and forth with Billy on the base and the bonuses and all that, never one time inside of those 4 or 5 days did I say to Billy, hey, Billy, are you ready to walk into that locker room and look at those 18-year-old men who you love, who you've been recruiting, some of them since they were 14 years old, and say, hey guys, listen, I love you, but I'm going to the NBA. Are you ready to walk into your athletic director's office, who he has always loved, and say, hey, listen, Jeremy, thanks for everything, but I'm going to the NBA? Are you ready, maybe, Billy, to do an exit press conference with all the fans at Florida who've had your back and say, thanks, guys, for everything, but I'm going to the NBA? Never once did I ask him any of those questions, any of those real questions. The terms were awesome. The deal was great. So often in life, I think, have you ever done that? Like you walk out of a meeting or you hang up the phone or you finish a conversation and you're like, sweet, they didn't bring it up. Did that ever happen? You're like, dude, that's beautiful. They must have forgotten. Awesome. To me, those are the moments when we can connect. Those are the moments when we can connect in powerful ways. The mistake I made was I was too transactional. Didn't stay as relational as I needed to be throughout that journey. Staying relational in the world that we live in is so key to our ability to continue to grow. I believe relationships really do have an integral part to our continued business success. The other thing I think is important is how many people in the room have folks that call you on the phone? And when they call you, you look down at the number and the name, and you see their name and their number, and you go, oh my gosh. Like, what do you want? Right? I mean, like, what do you want? Go away, right? And don't you just want to hit end, right? Isn't the end a beautiful decline? It's such a beautiful thing, isn't it? I mean, they're just gone, poof, right? So I had a client who made me feel that way, and literally every time she called me, I was exhausted. I mean, it was just the deals were never big enough, never good enough. The terms were never right. It was never, ever enough. And she would call several times a day, every day. And I would feel the blood like rush out of my body when I would see the name, and I would think, man, this is exhausting. And finally, I asked myself a question that a longtime client and friend, Tom Izzo, can I say his name here, the head coach at Michigan State men's basketball, an amazing guy, by the way. Tom used to say to his players, you better be better than your problems, right? You better be better than your problems. And I said to myself, God, you know what? Is she better than her problems, right? Is she worth all of this energy? And finally, I thought, you know, I either need to let this relationship go or have a difficult conversation. And finally, I had a tough conversation and realized I couldn't align our expectations. I couldn't deliver against what I believed to be unrealistic, and I let it go. And what I found was I stepped over here to a team of 9 agents that were running college coaches, baseball players, golfers, broadcasters, and I thought, wow. And a team of 300 clients, I thought, wow, like now I can give this energy to these where their relationships and the connection was more aligned. I think we live in a world where we worry a lot about our time, and it's no question they're correlated and it matters. But deciding who deserves our energy to me is so key. At the end of the day, right, I would challenge you to say, who made you laugh? Who made you laugh? And do they deserve you? Getting clear on that to me is key. When we think about leaving here hopefully a little better, I think we've also got to roll it up into discipline, which so many people in this room, no question, amazing. But our ability to recover fast from tough moments is key. So Butch Harmon is a really special golf teacher out on the PGA Tour who has worked with a lot of really special golfers, men and women. And Butch is a guy that I found myself at a PGA event, and I found myself kind of down the range from him, and I was standing behind one of my golfers' bags. And I look down and I see Butch, and Butch is a pretty big personality, super fun guy, but I didn't know him at all, but I knew he was a fun, outgoing guy. And so I see him, our guys are both warming up, they don't really need us, so we just sort of started chatting. And as I'm chatting with Butch, who's worked with some special golfers, I thought, wow. So I said to him, I said, "Gal, Butch, you've worked with some of the best golfers in the world." And I said, what do you think is the one thing that's the biggest difference between the guys and gals out there that are 1 to 10 on the money list, that are the best, that are making cuts week after week after week with them, and everybody else? What do you think is the biggest difference? And literally, he didn't hesitate for a second. He said, oh, the best of the best, the 1 to 10, the ones making cuts, he goes, they recover really fast. And you know, when we think about moments, we all have tough moments, tough meetings, tough days, tough years, right? Our ability to stay focused on our ability to recover is key. I've had baseball players, I had a baseball player once who had a horrible season. It was just a tough season, and he was starting to question whether he could really do it or not. And so I pulled back and I put a video together of just great moments, just unbelievable moments of him having success at the plate as a player, of him hitting one hit down the gap, home runs, guys running out of the dugout, giving him high fives, just awesome moments. And I put this video together and I said, dude, I want you to watch this. It was like 2 minutes. I said, just remember how good you are and you belong here and you can do this. I said, I think we as business people, I believe, need that too. I have this thing on my computer, I call it a smile file. And I literally just drag and drop great stuff and put it in there and peek at it when maybe I've had tough days or tough moments. Maybe it's a physical thing that you save great notes, great stuff. But I think we as business people can use that no different than athletes use video to recover fast, to remind ourselves why we do what we do and to get to the core of that. The other thing about discipline, but that takes discipline, right? Recovery is anchored, I think, at the core in being disciplined and intentional about recovering. The other thing, I'll tell you a fun personal story. So my husband and I have our first daughter. So this is going to make these Midwest guys blush. But ladies, you got to have my back on this story, okay? So my husband and I have our first daughter, and she's just a gift, right? We have parents in the room, yes, okay? So what a gift, right? It's just amazing. And so we have our first daughter, and you know, she's about 5 months old, and all of a sudden I'm like, this is insane, but I think I might be pregnant. But no way, right? Because ladies, right? Not happening. Just saying. So I think this is incredible. So I take a test, and I am. And I take another one, and I am. And I take like 15 more, and I am. And I'm like, there's no way. So after I picked my husband off the floor, I call my doctor and I said, look, you're not going to believe this. She had just delivered our first one. I said, look, I think I might be pregnant. And she's like, you got to be kidding me. And I said, no. And she literally is laughing on the other end of the phone. So I said, no. And she goes, well, get in here. Let's see what's going on. So I literally get, you know, midday the next day, it was that night I talked to her, and the next day, at kind of midday, at kind of a lunch hour, I drive over, my husband drives from his office, we meet at her office, and we walk in, and I take a test, and I'm pregnant. And I'm like, this is insane, right? So, but what a gift, but wow. So I walk back into a little room, and she said, well, let's see how far along you are. Let's see what's going on. So I go back, and I lay down on the little table, right, in the doctor's office. Many of us, right, have been in there. And I lay down, and she puts the sonogram on my stomach. And she said, oh, my gosh, Molly. She said, look at this. I look over at the monitor, and there's a baby with arms and legs kicking. She goes, God, Molly. She said, you're 12 and a half weeks pregnant. I'm like, okay, no, that's coming from another room. That is not happening right here. And she goes, oh yeah, girl, you're 12 and a half weeks. And my husband's over in the corner, right, exactly where he ought to be in that moment, right? So, I mean, and there are daggers flying out of my eyes, okay, at my sweet and wonderful husband. So all of a sudden, after a couple minutes, we're trying to pump each other up, and we can figure this out, honey, and we'll find a way, right? Like, all of a sudden, she goes, hold on a minute. She puts a line on the screen and puts another baby on the screen. She said, Molly, you're 12 and a half weeks with twins. I said, now that is coming from another room. So I'm like, this is insane, right? I mean, because 3 kids in 12 months, really? So all of a sudden, I like sort of look at my doctor, and I look at my husband. After a couple minutes, I looked down at my watch, and I went, oh my gosh. I said, look, I said, it is, I said, this is insane. I said, it was like 12:15. I said, I have a lunch with Doc Rivers at 12:30. I said, I gotta go. So I literally look at her, I look at my husband, and I said, I gotta go. So I get up off the table, I'm walking out of the doctor's office, and as I'm walking, my doctor is following me down the hallway. Following me. She goes, now, Molly, look, you're high-risk pregnancy with multiples. So I'm going to need to see you every other week. I'm like, every other week? Like, do you come to the house? How is that going to work? She goes, oh, no, girl, every other week, you got to be in here. And I'm like, oh, my gosh, right? So I get in my car. I'm driving like a maniac to this appointment. As I'm driving, I see this. I'm driving, and I'm thinking, you know, I better call my mom and dad and let them know that, you know, they're moving to Atlanta, right? Just saying. So I get my mom on the phone, and she's awesome, and I'm like, hey, Mom, I just want to give you a little update. I said, you're not going to believe this. I said, but, Mom, I'm pregnant. She goes, oh, my God, you got to be kidding me. And I'm like, no, Mom, but it's fine. I said, we'll figure this out, right? Like, we can do this. And she goes, geez. And I said, I know. And after she, like, chills out just enough, I said, but, like, Mom, just so you know, I said, it's twins. She goes full-blown psychotic on me, okay? She said, I can still hear her. She said, let me tell you something, Molly. She said, I just retired, okay? And the absolute last thing I want to have to do is move to Atlanta and raise your children. right? And I'm like, well, you're moving, sister, so buckle up, right? I park my car, I run into this meeting with Doc, and as I'm walking, and I'm like, man, like, do I tell him? I mean, do I tell him about this whole twins thing? Because you tell somebody you're having 3 kids in 12 months, and it can jam up a meeting a little bit, you know what I'm saying? So I literally was a moment when I had to park it. And we all deal with things like this. We all have stuff right now, don't we, in our lives coming at us. We got stuff, we got relationships, we got people, we got business challenges, we got all that. But you know what I found in that moment was I got to control what I can control, and I got to show up and be present for Doc right now. I would encourage you to pull back and say, what are the things that I can control? And focusing and putting our energy around the controllables, I think helps us manage our energy even better. So as you leave here, I hope that at the end of the day, you can truly believe in our ability to evolve and know that guys like Smoltzy leaned into those moments, and what they found on the other side was magical stuff. That our ability to get clear on the kinds of relationships that we're building and the work that we do is key. Managing our energy sometimes more than our time is imperative. Who deserves you? Who deserves your energy? And of course, our ability to recover fast from tough days, tough moments, tough years is integral. So I would challenge you to pull back and pick one thing. Just pick one thing and roll it up into the life and the people that you serve, maybe so you can do it a little bit better. It's awesome to be with you guys. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
What a great message. Let's give it up to her one more time. Molly Fletcher.